Hey everyone, it's Taehyung. I've been trying to find the right moment to tell this story, but maybe there's never really a right time when something still sits so heavy inside your heart. Sometimes the silence you keep becomes louder than anything else. And lately, that silence has been following me everywhere. I've talked about my music, about love, art, and even about loneliness. But there's one story I've never shared, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I didn't know how to explain what it feels like when someone you love so deeply collapses in front of you because of something you said. When I was growing up, my mom was my safest place. She is the kind of person who could make even the dullest morning feel like sunshine. She worked hard, sacrificed everything, and gave me more love than I ever deserved. And for most of my life, all I ever wanted was to make her proud, to make her smile and say, "That's my son." But life doesn't always go the way you imagine when you're a kid dreaming of the stage. There comes a time when the applause stops meaning peace. When you start to realize that every dream has a price tag attached to your name, and sometimes the people who pay the most aren't you, but the ones who raised you. It all started with a truth I could no longer keep to myself. A truth that had been building quietly for months, maybe even years. Something about who I really am, what I really wanted for my future, and what kind of love I felt was right for me. And even though I told myself over and over again, she'll understand, deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. That day, I remember sitting in the living room of my parents' house in Daegu. The smell of my mom's cooking still lingered in the air, and she was humming softly, something she always did when she was nervous or when she tried to pretend that everything was fine. She looked up from the kitchen counter and smiled when she saw me standing there. "Why are you so serious, Tai?" she asked, half joking. I tried to smile back, but my hands were shaking. There are moments when your body knows before your mind does that something is about to change. My heart was pounding like it wanted to warn me, "Don't do it yet." But I had already promised myself that I wouldn't run away this time. I needed to be honest, not just for me, but for the kind of man I wanted to become. So I told her. I told her that I wasn't going to live the life everyone expected of me. That there were choices I wanted to make that might look selfish to the world, but felt right to my soul. And as soon as I started talking, her smile began to fade. Her eyes didn't show anger, just confusion, then shock, then something I can only describe as heartbreak. She asked me to repeat it. I did, and before I could even finish explaining, I saw her legs give way. She reached for the table, her lips trembling, whispering my name Tae. And then everything slowed down. I caught her before she hit the floor. My mom collapsed in my arms. For a second, I couldn't even breathe. All I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat thundering inside my head, louder than any crowd I've ever faced on stage. I remember screaming her name, shaking her shoulders, trying to get her to open her eyes. It felt like the world had stopped spinning. Minutes felt like hours before she finally came back to consciousness. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at me like she didn't recognize the person holding her. And that that broke me more than anything else ever could. I called for my dad and we helped her to the couch. She kept whispering things like, "No, no, my son wouldn't say that, and you don't mean it, right?" But I did mean it. And in that moment, I hated myself for it, for being the reason the strongest woman I know suddenly looked so fragile. That night, the house was filled with silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that crawls under your skin and makes it hard to breathe. I sat beside her, holding her hand, but she wouldn't look at me. Her fingers were cold, and every time she took a breath, it felt like she was trying not to cry. People always talk about bravery like it's this loud, dramatic thing. But sometimes bravery is just sitting there knowing you broke someone's heart because you couldn't keep lying to them. And I think that was the hardest part, realizing that honesty can still hurt the people you love the most. I didn't sleep that night. I went outside, sat under the sky, and kept asking myself, did I do the right thing? Was the truth worth it? And somewhere deep inside, a small voice answered, yes, because love built on lies will eventually collapse too. The next morning, my mom didn't come out of her room. I made her breakfast, left it outside her door, and just waited. Hours passed before she finally opened it. She looked tired, her eyes swollen from crying, but she didn't yell or ask me to take it back. She just said, Tai, do you know what you've done? I nodded, and she said, then I hope you're strong enough to live with it. Those words have never left me. They echo in my head every time I think about that day. Because what she meant wasn't anger, it was a warning. She knew that choosing truth in a world built on expectations is a lonely road. After that, we didn't talk for weeks. We texted sometimes, but it was more talk surface level, polite, almost like two strangers learning how to speak again. I kept touring, kept smiling for cameras, but inside I carried that image of her collapsing like a ghost that followed me everywhere. It haunted me backstage, in the studio, even when fans screamed my name. There is a strange kind of pain that comes from hurting someone out of love. It doesn't leave scars you can see, it leaves ones that grow deeper every time you remember their face. Sometimes I wish I could go back and soften the truth. Maybe tell it differently, maybe wait for the right moment. But then again, is there ever a right moment to tell someone the truth that will change how they see you forever? The thing about truth is it doesn't ask for permission. It arrives when it's ready, whether your heart is or not. That day changed everything for me. Not just my relationship with my mom, but the way I understood love, honesty, and family. I realized that love isn't always about agreement. Sometimes it's about endurance. It's about staying even when the world around you is shaking. When my mom collapsed, it wasn't because she hated me or because she didn't care. It was because, in her eyes, the boy she raised disappeared for a moment, replaced by a man she didn't recognize. She was scared of losing me to a version of myself she didn't understand. And I get it now. Parents build stories in their heads about who their children will become. And when that story suddenly changes, it's not just shocking, it's grief. They mourn the version of you they thought they knew. That's what my mom was doing. She wasn't rejecting me, she was grieving. And I think a part of me was grieving too. When I came back to Seoul a few days later, the city didn't feel like home. The lights were still bright, the traffic still loud, and people still smiled when they recognized me on the street, but everything felt heavier. Like I was walking under invisible rain that only I could feel. I kept replaying that moment in my head, her falling, my hands catching her, the way her voice trembled when she said my name. It's strange how a single second can become a lifetime inside your memory. No matter how busy the day gets, that second always finds a way to visit me. The first few days back, I couldn't even enter the studio. Music usually feels like therapy, but this time it didn't help. Every chord I played reminded me of home, and every melody sounded like something was missing. I'd pick up my guitar, strum a few notes, then put it back down. Silence was easier. One evening, Namjoon came over. He didn't knock, he just walked in, like he always does when he knows I'm not okay. He looked around the living room, saw the untouched food on the table, and said quietly, "You haven't eaten, have you?" I didn't answer. He sighed, sat down across from me, and said, "You know, sometimes telling the truth feels like betrayal, even when it's love." I looked up at him, surprised. "How do you always know what I'm thinking?" He smiled a little, that calm, knowing smile he always has. "Because I've been there too, Tai. Maybe not the same way, but I know what it's like to choose yourself and lose someone in the process." That night, we talked for hours. I told him everything, how I couldn't get her voice out of my head, how I felt guilty for hurting her, how I kept wondering if I should have just stayed quiet. He listened without interrupting, just nodding, sometimes tapping his fingers lightly on his knee in rhythm with my words. Then he said something that I still think about. He said, "Love without truth is like trying to breathe underwater. You can do it for a while, but it'll destroy you in the end." It hit me so hard I couldn't speak, because that's exactly what I had been doing, breathing underwater, trying to live a life that looked perfect but didn't feel real. When Namjoon left, he put a small note on my desk. It said, "Let her love you in her own time." I didn't realize how powerful that sentence was until much later. Days turned into weeks. I went back to work, did shoots, recorded songs, smiled for cameras, but in between all that, there was still this quiet ache that wouldn't go away. You can perform happiness perfectly, but you can't fake peace. And I was running out of peace. One night, around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mom. Just one line, "Did you eat today?" It was so simple, but it felt like the world opened up again. I stared at it for a long time before replying. "Yes, Mom, I did." Then I added, "I miss you." She didn't reply that night, but the next morning I woke up to a photo of her garden. She had planted new flowers. The caption just said, "They're growing." That was her way of saying she was trying, and I think that's what love looks like after pain, quiet effort without words. I started writing again, not songs for the charts, not for albums or fans, just for myself. Sometimes I'd sit in front of the piano and let my thoughts fall out in sounds. I wrote about distance, forgiveness, and how some hearts don't need to be fixed. They just need time. Then, one afternoon, Jimin called. He has this instinct for knowing when something's off. "Hyung," he said, "I'm coming over. Don't say no." Before I could answer, he hung up. A few hours later, he was at my door with food, and that energy he always brings warm, chaotic healing. We ate quietly for a while. Then he said, "You know, when you tell the truth, The world doesn't always clap. Sometimes it just stares at you in silence. But silence isn't rejection. Sometimes it's just the sound of people learning to understand. That sentence stuck with me because maybe that's what my mom was doing, learning to understand me again. And I needed to understand her too. That night, I opened my journal and wrote, "Love is not about being understood immediately. It's about being patient enough to be understood eventually." A week later, a letter arrived at my apartment. It was from my mom. Her handwriting was neat but shaky. I opened it carefully, my hands trembling again, like the first day I told her the truth. She wrote, "Dae, I was angry at first, but not because of what you said. I was scared. I've spent my whole life protecting you, and suddenly I realized I couldn't protect you from everything. I thought I was losing the boy I raised, but maybe I was just seeing the man you've become. I don't understand everything yet, but I'm trying. Don't stop being honest, just don't stop calling me either." I cried reading that, not the kind of cry that's loud or messy, just quiet tears that keep falling no matter how many times you wipe them away. Her words didn't erase the pain, but they gave it meaning. It wasn't a wound anymore. It was a scar that reminded me love can survive truth if both sides are willing to learn. That night, I called her. We didn't talk about the truth again. We just talked about normal things, her cooking, my schedule, the weather. But behind every word, there was forgiveness taking shape, even if we didn't name it. After the call ended, I sat in the dark for a long time. And for the first time in months, I felt peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because honesty had finally stopped being a weapon. I realized something else too. When someone collapses, not just physically, but emotionally, it's because their heart reached its limit. And sometimes the only thing you can do is hold them until they find their balance again. That's what I learned from my mom. That love isn't about being strong all the time. It's about collapsing, breaking, rebuilding, and still choosing to stay. I used to think truth and love were enemies, but now I see they're just two sides of the same thing, both terrifying, both necessary. You can't love deeply without being honest, and you can't be honest without risking pain. So I stopped wishing for an easy love. I started hoping for a real one, the kind that grows slowly, like her flowers, even after a storm. When I walked into the hospital room, everything around me went quiet. The sound of machines, the faint beeping of the monitor, the steady rhythm of my mom's breathing, it all blended into a single sound that I can't even describe. It was like time stopped, and all I could see was her lying there, so fragile, so still. I had always seen my mom as this unbreakable person, someone who could survive anything. But that day, when I saw her on that hospital bed, I realized how wrong I was. She wasn't unbreakable, she was human. And I was the one who broke her. I walked closer, trying not to let the tears fall, but they came anyway. I held her hand and whispered, "Mom, it's me, it's Taehyung." Her hand twitched a little, just enough for me to feel her warmth. That's when everything I had been holding inside finally exploded. All the guilt, the pressure, the endless need to be perfect, it all came out. I told her everything, every truth I had been hiding from her, about how I'd been losing myself lately, how fame didn't feel like a blessing anymore, and how I was scared of disappointing her, of not being the son she could be proud of. For years, I had built a version of myself that looked strong, smiling for cameras, joking with fans, pretending I had everything under control. But inside, I was just a boy who missed his mom's cooking, who missed the sound of her humming while hanging laundry, who missed the comfort of being just Kim Taehyung, not V from BTS. I told her how I had made a decision that shocked her, the decision that made her collapse. I told her that I wanted to step away for a while, to stop everything. I wanted to disappear, even just for a year. No performances, no cameras, no interviews, just quiet. When I told her that, I thought she would understand. But instead, she broke down. She thought I was giving up. She thought I was throwing away everything I worked for, everything she sacrificed for me to have. And when I saw her faint that night, my world collapsed with her. I remember kneeling beside her, shaking, shouting her name. The sound of her body hitting the floor replayed in my mind like a nightmare that wouldn't stop. I didn't care about fame, about the fans, about the world anymore. All I could think was, please God, just let her wake up. When the doctor said it was from emotional shock, I felt like my heart stopped beating too. I kept asking myself, did I do this to her? Did my truth hurt her that much? I stayed at the hospital that night, sitting beside her bed. I didn't move, I didn't eat, I didn't even close my eyes. I just sat there, holding her hand, replaying every moment of my life when she smiled at me and how I might never see that smile again if she didn't wake up. Then, around 5 a.m., she opened her eyes. She was weak, but she smiled faintly and whispered, Taehyung, don't cry. Moms don't collapse because of anger. We collapse because we love too much. That sentence broke me more than anything else ever could because I realized she wasn't angry. She was scared. Scared that I was hurting and she didn't know how to help me. In that moment, I promised her something. I promised that I would take care of myself, not for the fans, not for the fame, but for her. Because I finally understood what love really means. It's not about being strong all the time. It's about showing your weakness to the people who love you and trusting that they'll stay. After that, I sat beside her and talked for hours about everything we'd never said, about the nights I cried alone in hotel rooms, the times I wanted to call her but didn't because I was too busy, the days I smiled on stage but felt empty inside. She listened to every word. She didn't judge, she didn't interrupt. She just held my hand and said, You're still my little boy, Taehyung. You don't need to be perfect. Hearing that, I broke down again because for the first time in years, I felt safe. I realized how easily I had let the world convince me that love was conditional based on success, numbers, and expectations. But that day, my mom reminded me love is just love. It doesn't need proof. When the morning light filled the room, she looked at me and smiled. You should tell your friends the truth someday, she said softly. They love you not because you're perfect, they love you because you're real. I didn't know it at the time, but those words would stay with me forever. After that morning in the hospital, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a sudden burst of enlightenment. It was slow, quiet, like the sound of a door creaking open after years of being locked. For days, I stayed by my mom's side. I watched her regain her strength. Little by little, she'd smile and tell me not to worry, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She wasn't just healing from the collapse, she was healing from years of silently carrying my pain. I realized something important during those days. Sometimes we hurt the people we love most, not because we mean to, but because we forget they feel everything we feel. My mom had been strong for me for so long that I forgot she wasn't invincible. There were moments when I'd wake up in the hospital chair and see her asleep, her hand still holding mine, as if she was afraid that if she let go, I'd disappear again into the world that kept taking me away from her. When she was finally discharged, we went home together. It felt strange being back in my old room, surrounded by posters, photos, and memories from a time when life was simpler. I touched the old guitar leaning against the wall, the one she had bought me when I was 15. I remembered her face when I told her I wanted to become a singer. She didn't understand what trainee meant, but she believed in me anyway. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the city lights. Everything looked peaceful, but inside me was chaos. I knew I had to tell the company about my decision. I knew I had to tell the members too. And most of all, I knew that when the truth came out, people would talk, the world would speculate, twist the story, and judge. But I also knew one thing: I couldn't keep living like a shadow of myself. So I made a call. When I told my manager that I needed time off real time, not just a short break, I could hear the hesitation in his voice. He asked, "Are you sure, Taehyung? You know what this means, right?" And I said, "Yes, I know exactly what it means." That night, I met with the members. It wasn't easy. The room was quiet, everyone was tired. We were in the middle of promotions, and I knew how much pressure everyone was already under. I looked at them, my brothers, and I told them the truth, that I needed to step back, that I wasn't okay, that my mom had collapsed because of how far I had pushed myself. No one spoke at first. Then Namjoon Hyung sighed and said, "You don't have to apologize, Taehyung. You're human too." Jimin looked down, his voice breaking a little when he said, "We just want you to be okay." Even Yoongi Hyung, who doesn't show emotion easily, just nodded quietly. That simple gesture said more than words ever could. That night, we didn't talk about schedules or promotions. We just talked about life, exhaustion, fear, everything we usually hid behind smiles and interviews. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. After that, the company agreed to give me a break. It wasn't a scandal, it wasn't a dramatic exit, it was just me stepping away for a while to breathe. For the first time in a long time, I woke up without an alarm. I didn't check my phone, my emails, or my social media. I just walked outside barefoot on the grass, feeling the morning dew between my toes. I can't explain how peaceful it was, like the world was finally giving me permission to be still. I spent days painting, taking photos, and writing music that no one would hear, songs not meant for the stage but for my soul. I didn't care if they were perfect. I just needed to feel again. Sometimes I'd visit my mom's favorite cafe. She'd sip her coffee, pretending not to watch me too closely, but I knew she was just making sure I was okay. Every time she smiled, I felt like I was healing a little more. But healing isn't a straight line. There were nights when I'd still cry for no reason. Nights when I missed the sound of fans chanting my name and then immediately felt guilty for missing it. It's strange missing the thing that broke you. One evening, I walked by a park and saw a small group of street performers singing under the streetlight. They weren't perfect, but they were free. Their voices weren't trained, their timing wasn't precise, but their hearts were there. And I remember that's why I fell in love with music in the first place. Not because of fame, not because of applause, but because music made me feel alive. That night, I sat down with my guitar again. My fingers trembled at first, but when I strummed the first chord, it felt like breathing again after holding it in for too long. I started writing a song about that moment, about truth, about pain, about the love that almost destroyed me but ended up saving me. It wasn't meant for anyone to hear, but I think it was meant for my mom. She found the notebook later. She smiled and said, "You wrote this for me, didn't you?" I laughed and said, "Maybe." But deep down, I knew it was true. Because everything I am, everything I have started with her love. The days after that were quiet in a way I hadn't known for years. No cameras following me, no rehearsals, no schedules that blurred one day into another, just silence. At first, the silence scared me. I didn't know how to live without the rhythm of noise, without the constant pulse of lights and music and cheers. But slowly, I began to understand that silence isn't empty. It's full of answers you can only hear when everything else stops. There were mornings when I'd wake up early and just sit by the window watching the light crawl over the buildings. Sometimes I'd pick up my notebook and write whatever came to mind, memories, lyrics, small pieces of truth I'd been too afraid to say out loud. My mom would peek in sometimes, pretending she needed to tidy up, but I knew she just wanted to check on me. She'd bring tea, set it down gently, and say, "You look better today." And I did, because every day away from the noise gave me a little more of myself back. I began to remember what happiness felt like, real happiness, not the kind that depends on applause. One day, I went for a walk through the old neighborhood. People recognized me, of course, but this time their smiles felt different, softer, kinder. A little boy ran up to me holding a small notebook. He asked, "Hyung, are you still going to sing again?" I smiled and said, "Yeah, I think so, but this time I'll sing differently." He didn't understand what I meant, but I did. For the first time, I didn't want to sing for fame or perfection. I wanted to sing for healing, for connection, for truth. When I got home that evening, I sat with my mom again. She looked at me with that familiar mix of love and worry that only mothers have. "Do you regret telling me the truth that night?" she asked softly. I took a deep breath and said, "No. I think that was the first time I ever really told anyone who I am." She nodded and smiled faintly. Sometimes the truth breaks things before it fixes them. Her words stayed in my mind for days. Because she was right. The truth had broken me, broken her, even shaken the people around me, but it also set something free. It stripped away the mask I'd been wearing for so long, and underneath all of it, I found myself again. After a few weeks, I started writing music again. Not for an album, not for the charts, just for me. I'd sit in my room with my guitar, whispering lyrics that no one else would hear. The songs were raw, imperfect, filled with small moments of truth that I was finally brave enough to face. Sometimes my mom would listen from the kitchen. She'd hum along quietly, and it reminded me of my childhood when her voice filled the house like sunlight. Those moments became the core of my healing. Then, one night, I received a message from Jimin. It was simple: Hyung, we miss you. I stared at the message for a long time. For months, I'd been afraid of facing everyone again, not because I didn't love them, but because I didn't know if I was ready to be Taehyung from BTS again. But when I read that message, I realized something important. I didn't have to choose between being Taehyung and being V. Both are me. Both are parts of my truth. So I decided to visit the members. The reunion was quiet at first. We didn't talk much. We just existed together. It was comfortable, like slipping back into a familiar rhythm after a long silence. Namjoon smiled at me and said, "You look peaceful." And I was. For the first time in years. We talked about music, about how each of us had changed, about how fame isn't what defines us, it's how we carry it. That night, I told them about the song I had written for my mom. They listened, and when I finished, there was silence in the room. Then Yoon Gi-hyung said, "You should record that." I laughed and said, "It's too personal." He smiled a little. "That's why it's perfect." His words echoed in my mind for days. Eventually, I decided to record it, not for release, not for fans, just to keep it. But when I played it for my mom, she cried. She said, "Other people need to hear this too, Taehyung. You don't know who it might heal." So I thought about it. And then, for the first time since everything happened, I walked into the studio again. The air felt different. The familiar smell of microphones and coffee cups, the faint sound of laughter from the next room, it all came rushing back. But this time, I wasn't nervous, I wasn't hiding, I was ready. When I started singing, I didn't think about pitch or tone or perfection. I just sang. I sang the truth. The song was about love, the kind that hurts and heals at the same time. It was about my mom, but also about everyone who's ever carried pain silently, thinking they have to be strong all the time. When I finished, the producer was quiet for a long time. Then he said, This this sounds like your heart." And maybe that's what it was. Not a comeback, not a performance, just a heartbeat. That night, I sent the recording to my mom. She replied with just one message: "I'm proud of you." I cried again. But this time, the tears felt warm. They weren't from pain, they were from peace. For the first time, I felt whole again. When I finally returned to the stage, I wasn't the same person I used to be. I looked out at the crowd, and instead of feeling pressure, I felt connection. I could see every face, every light stick, every tear filled smile, and I realized that the truth I once feared to share had become the bridge that brought me closer to them. I told them everything, not in a press conference, not through headlines, but through a song. I told them that behind every performance, there were nights of doubt, fear, and loneliness. I told them that my mom collapsing wasn't the end of a story, but the beginning of my healing. When the last note faded, I bowed deeply. It wasn't just a gesture of respect, it was a thank you for waiting, for believing, for seeing me not just as an idol, but as a human being. Later that night, I called my mom. She said, I watched your performance. You looked free. And I smiled because she was right. For the first time in my life, I wasn't hiding behind perfection. I was standing in the truth. Now, whenever I think back to that moment when she collapsed, it doesn't hurt the same way anymore. It reminds me of how powerful love can be, how it can break you, only to rebuild you stronger and softer at the same time. I've learned that the people who truly love you don't need you to be perfect. They just need you to be honest. To my fans, to everyone who's been part of my journey, thank you for walking with me through mine. This is not the end of my story. It's just a new beginning.